There is a figure that crosses cultures, centuries, and mythologies, the being that inhabits the border between what is known and what has not yet been named. She is ancient, and antiquity, for those who know how to read it, is another word for depth. Today she stands before a crystal, and she is observing something that physics has known for centuries, and that many spiritual traditions have known for far longer than that. That white light, when it passes through a prism, reveals that it was always multiple, that each frequency goes in a different direction, and that this is not a flaw in the crystal. It is the nature of light. The question we brought today is not about relationships, not about communication, not about how to make yourself better understood. It is about something more fundamental than all of that. What if not everyone could access your frequency? And what if that were not a problem to solve but a truth to honor? Let's enter this idea slowly. Have you ever walked away from a conversation with the feeling that you spoke and were not heard? Not because the other person was distracted. They were there, responding, participating. But something in what you said did not arrive. The words arrived. The meaning got lost somewhere in the middle, as if you had sent a message and the other person had received only half of it. Or maybe you recognize a different version of this. You are in a group of people, it could be family, coworkers, old friends from a phase of life that has already passed. And there is a version of you that functions well there, that answers the right questions, laughs at the right moments, moves through that space without creating friction. But it is a version, not all of you. A part of you stayed outside the door before you walked in because you know, from somewhere you cannot quite explain, that if you brought everything, something would break. Someone would become uncomfortable. The atmosphere would shift. You would have to spend energy explaining what should simply be received. So you leave that part outside, and you walk in with what is safe to bring. And then, eventually, you meet someone. Sometimes it is a person. Sometimes it is a book that feels like it was written specifically for you. Sometimes it is an idea that arrives at exactly the moment you needed it. And the feeling is completely different from everything we just described. There is no effort, no translation, none of that quiet tension of monitoring what you are saying before you say it. What you speak arrives whole. What the other person says arrives whole. There is a resonance you did not have to build, because it was already there before any word was spoken. These two experiences, the friction of not being reached and the ease of being completely found, are not random. They are not good luck or bad luck. They do not depend only on your ability to communicate or on the other person's willingness to listen. They have a deeper explanation than that. And it begins with a simple idea that physics uses and that life confirms every day in ways we do not always know how to name. The idea of frequency. Think about a radio for a moment. A radio does not receive all stations at the same time. Not because it is defective. Not because the other stations do not exist. But because it is tuned to a specific frequency, and that tuning is exactly what allows it to receive anything clearly. If it tried to pick up everything at once, the result would be noise, static, nothing comprehensible. Tuning is not a limitation. It is what makes communication possible. Now think about yourself. From a very early age, most of us learned a skill that seems useful, and that in many ways genuinely is. The skill of adjusting your frequency depending on the environment, of speaking more simply when a conversation cannot hold complexity, of keeping the more intense parts, the harder to explain parts, the parts that fall outside the pattern. Not because those parts are wrong, but because creating friction is exhausting, and belonging feels more important than being completely seen. And for a while, this works. You learn to read the room, to find common ground with people very different from you, to build connections across varied terrain. This is not dishonesty. It is a form of intelligence. But there is a point, and most people watching this have probably crossed that point at some moment in their lives, where adjusting your frequency stops being a skill and becomes a habit you no longer chose. Where you start adjusting automatically, before even assessing whether the environment is actually asking for it. Where you simplify before you try. Where you hold back before you offer. And over time, a question begins to surface, sometimes out loud, sometimes only in a rare moment of silence. The question is the original frequency still there? The one that exists when no one is watching, when you are completely alone or completely at ease, Is it still intact? Or has it been adjusted so many times that you have lost the signal back to it? There is an idea that appears across many different spiritual traditions, cultures that never met, eras that never touched, and it always points to the same place. The idea that inside every person there is a core that does not negotiate, not out of stubbornness, not out of arrogance, but because that core is what you are before any adaptation you made in order to survive. It is what was there before the strategies, before the useful masks, before you learned that certain parts of you were welcome in certain places and that others were better left stored away. That core remains, regardless of how much you have adjusted around it. And the idea worth carrying forward from here, simple but with weight, is this: when you are in contact with that core, when you are transmitting from it rather than from an adjusted version, the frequency you emit is specific. Not generic, not for everyone, specific. And specific frequencies find what they can find. Not everything, not the majority, but what they find for real. Think about the people with whom you have the most real conversations of your life. There are probably not many of them. You probably did not need much time with them to know that something different was happening there. There is a quality of presence in those connections that does not exist in surface-level ones, no matter how pleasant the surface-level ones can be. That difference is not coincidence. It is frequency. What if the question most of us grew up with was wrong from the start? The pain of not being understood is real. We are not questioning that. The desire for connection is one of the most human desires that exists. There is nothing wrong with it. But the question, how do I make myself understood by everyone, carries inside it an assumption we rarely examine. The assumption that being accessible to everyone is the goal. That misunderstanding is always a communication problem. That if you find the right words, the right tone, the right way to present who you are, everyone will be able to receive it. And maybe that is simply not true. Not because you are superior to those who do not understand you. Not because they are inferior or less developed or flawed in some way, but because different frequencies reach different wavelengths. And trying to force a frequency to reach what is outside its spectrum is not generosity. It is distortion, and distortion exhausts both sides. Think about what actually happens when you spend time trying to explain yourself to someone who, no matter how much goodwill they have, and no matter how much goodwill you have, simply cannot receive what you are transmitting. You do not become more understood over time. You become smaller, adjusting, simplifying, removing the parts that create friction, until what remains is no longer you. It is a version of you that the other person can process without discomfort. And that version might feel comfortable for both of you, but it is not real. It is like listening to music with the volume so low that you catch the rhythm but cannot hear the lyrics. You know something is there, but you cannot access what it actually is. And there is a quiet cost to this that almost no one names, not just for you, but for the person on the other side as well, because they are not connecting with you for real. They are connecting with the adjusted version. And even if that version is comfortable, even if it does not create conflict, even if it keeps the relationship functioning on the surface, it is not real. And somewhere, in a way that perhaps neither of you can fully articulate, both of you feel that. There is an ease that is missing, a depth that never arrives. And then the question shifts direction completely. It is no longer, how do I make myself understood by everyone? It is, how do I stop distorting my frequency to be accessible to those who were not made to receive me, and begin to trust that whoever was made to receive me will find me when I am truly transmitting? That question is a little frightening when you really sit with it, because it implies letting go. Letting go of the need for universal approval. Letting go of the idea that being rejected or misunderstood by someone is evidence that something is wrong with you. Letting go of the adjusted version you spent years building to create belonging in places that, perhaps, were never really yours. And that is not arrogance. It is not isolation. It is not giving up on connecting with people. It is, in fact, the opposite of that. It is the condition for real connection, the kind that requires no translation, the kind that demands no distortion from either side, to become possible. The crystal does not try to control where each color goes when light passes through it. It simply exists transparent, specific, whole. And the light does the rest. Every spiritual tradition that has survived through time has had to answer, at some point, a version of this question. Why do some people find each other, and others, no matter how hard they try, never truly get close? And none of those traditions answered with human defect. None of them said that one side is less valuable or less capable. All of them arrived, by different paths, at a version of the same idea. That there is a compatibility that precedes conscious choice. That certain people recognize others not by what they know about them, but by what they feel in their presence. Something that resonates before any word is spoken, before any introduction, before any explanation. A recognition that does not need to be constructed. That is already there. You have probably already lived this. You have felt the immediate recognition with someone, that sense that you do not need to explain yourself, that you can be whole without preparation, that the frequency is compatible before any real conversation has even begun. And you have also felt the permanent friction with someone where, no matter how much effort you put in, there always seems to be an incomplete translation in the middle. As if you were speaking in one language and the other person were hearing in another, and neither of you is fluent enough in the others to let what is essential come through. These are not random phenomena. They are not social bad luck. They are not communication failures you could fix if you only knew the right words. They are information. Think about how this works in nature. Radio waves exist all around you right now. Dozens of stations transmitting simultaneously, crossing the exact same space you occupy. But you do not hear them because you are not tuned to receive that frequency. They do not stop existing because of that. They are not blocked by you. They simply continue forward to where they can be received. And the right receiver, in the right place, tuned to the right frequency, picks up the complete signal with no static, no loss. That is how it works. The question is not whether you have enough value to be received by someone. You do. The question is not whether you need to become more articulate, more charismatic, more palatable, easier to understand. Maybe it is not about that at all. The question is whether you are transmitting from the true signal or from the modified version you built to create less friction in environments that were never really yours. Because one thing is adapting the way you communicate without losing the content of who you are. That is intelligence. That is skill. Another thing is altering the content itself, removing the parts that are most you, storing away what is densest, always presenting the version that creates the least possible friction, to the point where the signal you are transmitting no longer represents who you really are. When you do that, the connections you attract are real for the version you are presenting, but not for you. And there is a specific kind of loneliness that does not have a very clear name, but that many people know. The loneliness of being surrounded by people who like you, and feeling that none of them really knows you, because what they know is the version you decided to show. And you know this, and that distance between what is seen and what actually exists creates a kind of tiredness that rest does not cure. The path that many traditions point toward, in very different ways with very different words, is in the opposite direction from what fear suggests. Fear suggests hide more, adjust more, stay safer by being less yourself. But what all of these traditions perceived is that real protection does not come from becoming smaller. It comes from becoming more completely what you are. More specific, more whole, less adjusted to please, more faithful to what exists when you are completely alone with yourself. Not less, more. The frequency you transmit when you are whole, when you are not adjusted, when you are being completely what you are without negotiation, that frequency is specific. And it will find what it can find. Not everyone, not the majority, maybe just a few people, but those people will receive the complete signal. And one complete connection with a few people transforms life in a way that incomplete connections with many never can. Think about the fox's alchemy here in this deeper sense. The alchemist did not try to turn just anything into gold. They worked with what had the capacity to be transformed. The process was specific, a certain matter, a certain heat, a certain time. Forcing the process with the wrong material did not produce gold. Produced waste. Produced frustration. It produced the exhaustion of someone who worked hard and arrived nowhere. Not because the effort was lacking, but because they were working with the wrong ingredients. Perhaps your presence works the same way. It is not for everyone, and that is not a limitation. It is purity. The next time you walk away from a conversation with that familiar feeling that you spoke and did not arrive, maybe it is worth pausing before concluding that something is wrong with you. Maybe the frequency is intact. Maybe what happened was not your failure. Maybe the receiver simply was not tuned to pick up what you were transmitting. And that is no one's fault. It is no one's deficiency. It is simply two different signals crossing the same space without the overlap that would make complete communication possible. That happens. And it does not need to be dramatized as rejection, as evidence that you are too difficult, too intense, too complicated. Sometimes it is simply frequency. And the next time you feel the temptation to adjust, to simplify, to soften, to remove the parts of yourself that create friction in certain environments, ask yourself honestly, without judgment, just as a genuine observation. Am I adapting to communicate better? Or am I distorting myself to be accepted by someone who was not made to receive me? The difference between those two things is enormous. The first preserves who you are and improves how you arrive. The second keeps trading pieces of what you are for approval that, deep down, will never feel like enough because it was not built on the real. And you, deep down, know how to tell one from the other, even when it is hard to admit. Being whole does not mean being inflexible with everyone. It does not mean refusing connection with those who are different from you. It does not mean requiring people to understand you completely before you open up. It means not negotiating the core, the part that exists before the strategies. The frequency that is yours before any adjustment you made in order to survive in environments that were not built to receive you. That part does not need to be negotiated. It needs to be honored. The people who can access your real frequency, not the adjusted one, not the one you created to function in specific environments, but the one that exists when you are completely yourself, those people exist. And they will only find you when you are truly transmitting. Not the edited version, the original. It is not easy to trust this, especially if you spent a long time believing the problem was you, that you needed to adjust more to become more palatable, easier to receive. But consider the possibility that the problem was never the frequency. It was that you were trying to be received by the wrong receivers. The crystal does not try to control where each color goes. It simply exists transparent, specific, whole. And the light does the rest. The question that remains, to be carried lightly, not as a demand but as a gentle direction, is this: in which spaces of your life are you transmitting your complete frequency? And in which ones are you transmitting an adjusted version that no one, including you, can quite hear right? You do not need to answer now. Questions like this work underneath things, sometimes days later, sometimes in an ordinary moment when you least expect it. You are in the middle of a conversation, or washing the dishes, or trying to fall asleep, and something shifts. Let it shift. If something here touched a part of you that you usually keep stored away, if some frequency you recognize as yours found a little more permission to exist, maybe it is worth continuing along this path. And if you want, write one word in the comments. Just one. The word that describes how you feel when you are transmitting your complete frequency, without adjustment, without filter. When you are being whole. Just one word. Sometimes naming what you are when you are truly present is already an act of faithfulness to that frequency. And I am certain that what you write will find whoever was waiting for exactly that frequency. Not everyone can receive you, but those who can receive you whole. If this video made sense to you, if it named something you felt but did not know how to call, consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like. Not as an automatic gesture, as a signal that you want to keep finding content that tries to go deep, that does not simplify what should not be simplified, that treats you as someone capable of sitting with difficult questions without needing easy answers. Every person who subscribes is saying, in some way, this frequency I can receive. And that matters more than any number. Until the next video, still transmuting.